Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In this unit deep dive, we're going to be looking at the Wu's Castle unique unit, the Fire Archer. This is an archer that's allegedly good against a bunch of things that your typical archer isn't, including buildings and siege. And without spoiling too much, if you're one of those veterans who's been pining over the memory of Obsidian Arrows, I may have some good news for you. For a bit of context first, Wu are the infantry and naval focused of the new civilizations, and while it might seem a little strange to then have an archer unique unit, their bonuses focus mostly on infantry, and in fact, Wu lack thumb ring and the final archer armor. So we'll keep in mind throughout this is not really an archer civilization and is just meant to be a support unit. Beginning with a comparison to the regular archer line, they're a little more expensive with the same gold, but adding 20 wood to their cost. The real barrier to creating them though is the castle requirement, which is partly offset by the fact they're created over 50% faster than crossbows. In terms of stats, the two are almost copy-paste in many ways, with the same HP, armor, range, and speed, with the difference coming down to attack, where fire archers have one less base attack but fire 2 extra projectiles, along with about double the reload time of the crossbow, which is even a little longer than shown here in practice. As for hidden stuff, they have a bit worse accuracy than crossbows, with remember no thumb ring, and their bonus damage is somewhat different, featuring bonuses against buildings and ships. Now this is all greatly complicated by the fact they have two totally different ways they fire. The first way is against enemy units, where they fire 3 full-strength arrows, albeit with less attack, less accuracy, and half the reload rate of crossbows. Whether that all works out to be equal, or who has the edge, is a tough mental calculation, especially when different accuracies and enemy armor can be involved. So here we have them against a variety of samurai, which have artificially given a variety of different pierce armors, plus a ton of HP. If we let them fire at the samurai for 15 minutes, we can more easily compare them to crossbows, here with the fire archers in blue and crossbows in orange. Notice they're pretty similar when it comes down to it, though the fire archer has a bit of an edge against very low 0 or 1 pierce armor targets, while crossbows do a bit more damage over time against units with 4 or 5 pierce armor. Considering their higher cost, fire archers come out maybe a little worse, but not dramatically so. As just an archer doing regular archer things, it would be underwhelming and probably not worth making, but that's only half the story. The other half is it has a completely different firing mode against buildings and ships, where against those it suddenly adds +4 range and fires a single projectile with decent bonus damage. They have a base of 9 range in these cases, plus up to 2 more from Fletching and Bodkin Arrow in Castle Age, letting them outrange castles with those same techs. So far, they're just okay against buildings though, and despite having range, aren't really Obsidian Arrows level, dealing 4 damage against buildings per shot, which is barely ahead of Saracen allies, dealing 3 damage per shot at a faster fire rate. What really makes the Fire Archer strong is a unique tech called Red Cliff Tactics in Castle Age. For 400 food and 250 gold, this adds a bit of trailing fire and smoke to the arrows, which would probably be worth half the cost on its own for the intimidation factor, but then also adds in another 5 burning damage against ships and buildings. Suddenly, instead of the usual 1 damage that crossbows would do against buildings, you're getting 9 damage per shot, albeit at their relatively slow reload rate. That 4 increasing to 9 damage is actually very consistent, by the way, with exactly those numbers against everything from barracks to walls to castles, and also isn't impacted by masonry and architecture. Those techs add HP, but none of the pierce armor or building armor affects those numbers, making this all pretty straightforward and unstoppable. In terms of what that translates into compared to some other benchmarks, I don't want to oversell how anti-building a single fire archer is. Where a regular crossbow deals 30 damage per minute to a typical building, a fire archer without the unique tech does roughly double that, and with unique tech goes up to about 5 times a usual crossbow. Remember, it does 9 times the damage per shot, but is firing about half as often. Still, a longsword with arson or the Wu's Nightline replacement are in the 400s, a mangonel is at nearly 800, and rams are worth about 12 fire archers if we look at damage per minute. Of course, the big thing to keep in mind is fire archers outrange all of these other anti-building options, and in fact nothing else in Castle Age offers their combination of range and anti-building punch. We're talking about 11 range in Castle Age, and a group of 15 apply the same pressure to a town center that 3 mangonels do from significantly further away. So while individually they're not amazing, in a group with their unique tech, it can really add up. But how does this all hold up to other historic examples of anti-building archers, like the legendary Mayan Obsidian Arrows and even the Saracen team bonus? We're all familiar with Saracen crossbows and their extra punch, while fire archers are actually about the same as those. Remembering Wu can also have a Saracen ally, which brings him up to about 200 damage per minute. That's actually pretty much the same as crossbows with obsidian arrows back in the day, which also says nothing about the extra range. The only thing that technically had them beat was a Mayan obsidian arrow crossbowman with a Saracen ally, so maybe there is still something to pine over. Plus, obsidian arrows had double the effect against towers, gates, and stone walls for some reason I never understood. Now, one other alleged strength of the fire archer we should quickly touch on is against siege, which remember was highlighted in particular. On paper, the fire archer's projectiles have +1 bonus damage against these, but given their pierce attack is often blocked by the pierce armor of many siege units, they still just do 1 damage, as minimum damage only shows up if no other bonuses are present and effectively does nothing against any of the units shown here. On the other hand, there are some siege units with low pierce armor, in which case you do get the surprise +1 on every arrow. So against ballista elephants, organ guns, etc., they just have a little extra damage, though notice they don't use their long range ability. I kind of get the logic of having fire arrows burn down siege, but ironically, rams, scorpions, mangonels, trebuchets, and hussite wagons, which seem to me like the most flammable of the siege units, have too high a pierce armor to be affected, and it's ones like the ballista elephants getting burned. One other major point I want to emphasize as well is that while multiple projectile archers are usually good against high pierce armor targets, which you can do as the classic example, and are extra great against rams, fire archers are actually kind of the opposite. In fact, they only do 20% more damage to rams over time than crossbows, as while Chukanu and Kipchak extra arrows both end up dealing an extra 3 attack against rams, fire archers don't have that, and their slow fire rate on top just makes this a bad matchup for them. So that's a general breakdown of the unit, with buildings being their obvious specialty, particularly after you more than double their damage with unique tech and are using their unprecedented range. Now let's talk about how they do against other units though. First off, they are not good against archers. In theory, they can 3-shot a crossbow while taking 7 attacks in return, but lower accuracy and their slow fire rate means that doesn't really translate one-on-one while being a more expensive unit. With balanced resources, they lag way behind even crossbows missing thumb ring, and any good archer sib with that tech or a bonus will do even better than shown here. Of course, you also have to be very careful around skirmishers, and despite firing multiple arrows, which in other cases can be a bit of an advantage against high pierce armor targets, this is another departure from your Chukanu intuition, and fire archers are just obliterated with equal numbers. That said, they're actually okay against the spear and swordsman lines. They have a bit of bonus damage against spears, and while they don't quite match the crossbow's effectiveness, especially when we account for cost and ease of production, in a pinch, fire archers can contribute something here. As they go up against tougher units though, fire archers start to fall apart. Between their longer reload time and lengthy firing animation, they're much harder to micro against knights if you're used to crossbow reload timings, and are also just flatly doing less damage over time while costing more. Unquestionably, the crossbow line is the way to go if you're looking to snowball against knights, and the description calling out cavalry as a weakness, whereas it doesn't for crossbows, I think is tapping into something true even with large numbers. Likewise, despite a bonus against naval units, I wouldn't use them that way, except from a safe distance. Taking them off from long range, maybe, but don't get too carried away thinking your bonus is going to let you stand and take fights against ships firing back. So that's a few examples of what to expect against units, and even if they're okay in some matchups like spearmen, crossbows are for the most part just strictly better. Anything fire archers can do against units is really just gravy, on top of being an unusually mobile and effectively long-range siege unit. We should quickly touch on the Imperial Age though, even if just to show how little really changes. The elite upgrade is 800 food and gold, which is quite a bit more expensive than arbalesters, and adds +1 attack, +5 HP, and +1 range, in addition to a little more accuracy. Now range is always nice, giving them 1 more than an arbalester against enemy units, though in this case the attack can also be a pretty big deal, for example doubling the damage they do against a unit with 7 pierce armor like a paladin. Other than that, you have chemistry and bracer to pick up, but no armor. And when you fully upgrade them, they end up 1 attack behind an arbalester with 3 arrows and that 1 extra range. At first glance, it almost looks like they might be closing that gap and becoming at least as strong of an option against units, but let me put that thought out of your mind. First off, with balanced resources, they do not beat arbalesters, and in this case, you're seeing run-of-the-mill generic ones mowing them down. The elite fire archers aren't utilizing their 1 extra range here, but being closer like this actually helps with their inaccuracy, and expecting much from them against archers is just a bad idea. Obviously, skirmishers are terrible as well. We don't have to talk about that. Even against infantry though, the arbalester is just flat out better, and also cheaper. It takes out halberdiers and champions faster while having the same durability and a lower cost. If instead of going through individual examples though, we repeat the earlier test looking at the elite fire archer's damage per minute against different amounts of pierce armor over 15 minutes, again we see the suggestion they're maybe a little better against low armor targets, but generally worse against higher ones. But a problem with this comparison is it's not taking into account the higher cost of the fire archer. If we adjust for that, we get this graph. Don't worry about the exact numbers here on the y-axis, as it's just damage per minute per resource spent. But notice the arbalester line is higher against every enemy pierce armor, meaning it's giving you more firepower for what you spend. The gap is in fact the largest in a relative sense the closer you get to the magic number of 8 pierce armor, where you're getting roughly double the value from arbalesters. Again, this really hammers home the point that despite having multiple arrows, which we usually think of as being good against high pierce armor targets, with the Chukanu as a basis for that intuition, in this case, ironically, that's exactly when the elite fire archer starts to fall the farthest behind. All this to say, the elite fire archer's late game selling point comes down to their anti-building role, where while individually they do only a small fraction of the nearly 1000 damage per minute of an onager and over 2000 of a siege ram or traction trebuchet, that individual modesty of fire archers is quickly made up for with raw numbers. As a side note, they do get siege ram by the way, even if the tech tree at the moment says they don't. The main point though is 15 of them have the same anti-building punch as that siege ram and are better than a traction trebuchet, which is of course their trebuchet replacement at the siege workshop. Once you get a ball of 40 elite fire archers rolling, they can take out a castle in roughly a minute, depending on upgrades. So that's the fire archer, and while I admit it's a little odd for an infantry and naval focused civilization to have such a specialized archer unique unit, their bonuses for extra healing and the Jean swordsman as their other unique unit I think still justify the infantry label. Fire archers are mostly the way that you pressure your opponent into having to come out and engage your infantry and cavalry head on rather than a core unit in and of themselves. All in all, I actually think they're pretty fun, not being strictly better than the crossbow line in all cases, but bring something we haven't seen from an archer since the golden years of Obsidian Arrows, while even outranging defenses. Considering fire archers are locked behind a castle and unique tech, you get memeable moments without being a completely cheese unit. That'll do it for this one though. Huge thanks to Woodruff, James, Jared2142, Samantha, Shawarma Rider, Niels, Steven, and everyone else on Patreon for their amazing support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.